Okay, in terms of the stuff, the deadlines remain unchangified, so exam 2, quizzes part 3, deadline April 5th, end of day. Exam 3, exam 4, quizzes part 4, deadline April 26th, end of day. Exam number 5, deadlines at the end of the normal final time, but of course is available online. I'll mention this before, but I shall mention it again. To see if you need the final thing to do is once you've done 4 exams, as many quizzes you wish to do in the paper, you can look at your overall grade. If it's an A already, then you'll be done, because it can't get any more A than A. And all the stuff you haven't done is already graded as a 0, so that's your real-time, real grade in the class. If it's less than an A, then you can get the grade estimator, put in the best 3 exams, your quiz, paper grade, put in a hypothetical 100% for the final, and see what that would do. And if that is a letter grade higher or better than your real overall grade, then taking the final could be worth it. And of course you can put in other numbers to see like exactly what you'd have to get the improvement. And if the final can't do anything, it can't do anything. So that could be like good or bad. And so the final already is sort of pre-scored as a 0 if you don't do it. So again, you wouldn't have to worry about your grade changing. So if you do 4 exams, all the quizzes, the paper, and you're at an 82.4, you don't have to worry that the final is going to worsen your grade because it's already scored as a 0. And I don't go in and like drop stuff or do anything, that's done automatically. For the paper, draft deadline April 4th, +5 deadline April 9th, emergency deadline April 16th, desperation deadline April 26th, meeting not personally with the provost, but a mass meeting in Charles Winterwood from 2 to 3, so I'll be there and not in my office hours. But if you want to hang out in a meeting because they're super exciting, it's there. All the provosts, interesting stuff. Okay, so last time we're looking at our good dead friend Immanuel Kant talking about his stuff, and we saw that what he gets credited with is a Copernican-style revolution, badly drawn in ways that would probably annoy Kant if he wasn't dead. But he's dead, so there's nothing he can do. No, my marker. So, kind of the problem we saw, with representational realism, and it's one that our good dead friend David Hume pointed out, and also, of course, our good dead friends, the super dead skeptics, pointed out, was if we have representational realism, that's the idea that what's in your mind somehow represents what's up there in the world. And the skeptical problem presented for thousands of years has been, well, you can never get outside of your own mind to see your perception and to see the object. And I always use my, kind of Black Mirror Twilight Zone episode thing of, you wake up in a room with these monitors and an ominous voice says, choose which is real. And of course, if you can't get outside the room to look, you have no way of knowing. Now, Hume thought, in his skepticism regarding the senses, like the previous skeptics, he thought, yeah, there's no way to solve this, so just have some view. Kant thought he could fix it, because what he claims is that what we do is this. We have in our mind all these, to use a metaphor, filters or templates, etc. And instead of trying to say that this resembles the objects, he says the objects resemble our idea. Because what we do is the raw data comes in, whatever that is, and our mind processes the idea, puts on the templates, the filters of these concepts, which we'll see soon. And so what we have in here is a combination of whatever came in, whatever that might be, plus how it's shaped by what's in our mind. And so we can have a priori knowledge of stuff because it's already in our mind. We put it on the experience, and so we can know this stuff. And he thinks that solves the problem. But of course, he's wrong, because if he really did solve it, we'd just be saying, Kant got it right, this is all you need to know. But alas, no. Or maybe he did. Maybe we just don't know he's right. So, what's going on in our mind, according to him, is a mix of what's coming in and what we do with it. And again, I use the metaphor of like with a smartphone. You take a picture and it gets filtered, and that's what's in there. So the problem is, we still run, if you really want to push it, which one should, we still have the question of, okay, what is actually out there? What gets in here? And so do we know if there's anything really out there? And Kant says, well, again, the problem kind of pops up, again, for obvious reasons. We can never see what's out there. And Kant calls what we experience the phenomena, and what's out there is what is called the noumena, the really real for real. Now, his solution to this not being subjective is either brilliant or cheat or brilliant cheat. Because what he says basically is this. The old sort of view of objectivity was, literally, there's an object out there that we're all perceiving. So kind of our Cartesian view is, okay, we all have this idea in our minds, but it's about an object out there, so that's objective. Problem, of course, is we can never know if the object is out there, and even worse, we don't know if there are other people out there experiencing either. So what Kant says is, here's a solution. He claims that we all have the same basic mental structure, except people who are like super insane, because that would be kind of insanity. And so each of us have the same filters. To use a smartphone analogy, it's like if you have Instagram on your phone, whether it's an iPhone, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 40, whatever we're working on now, and whatever, or an Android phone, everyone has the same set of filters. And so if you're taking pictures of Instagram and filtering them, you don't know what's out there, so to speak, but everyone's got the same filters. So going with the metaphor, we all have in our mind all the same templates. And so according to Kant, if he's right, we all know that everyone is filtering whatever's coming in the same way. They all have the same set of filters. And so it's objective because it's interpersonal. Namely, it's not just me having this, everyone else has got it too. Or so he claims. So that makes it objective. Now, critics, of course, can say, well, it's still just in our minds, so how is that really objective? And Kant's dead, so we can't say anything about it. Before pressing on, anything about this? Or how to draw a very bad one that needs any stuff? So one of the things Kant tried to do, again, he's trying to get to these synthetic a priori judgments. Because sort of his mission objective was, he read Leibniz, and was a Leibnizian rationalist, and then he read Hume and said, how do I deal with this? Hume's ruined everything. How do I unruin the things? And he thinks the only way to fix the nightmare that Hume created is with the synthetic a priori. So we saw when we looked at Hume, Hume ends up saying, skepticism regarding the senses, we can't know, have some beer. Also with causation, he says, can't know, have some beer. And so Kant says, he didn't want beer apparently, he wanted to solve the problem. So what Kant's trying to do is, instead of saying, why do we think this, like Hume did, he's trying to sort of recapture traditional epistemology metaphysics, namely trying to say what is. So it's going to be Hume. Now the analytic judgments, as we saw, he takes the stock approach, going way back. So analytic judgments, influenced by Leibniz, was influenced by others all the way back. These are ones that rest on the principle of contradiction. We saw before, contradictions are always false, tautology is always true, and these would be ones such that if you deny it, it would create a contradiction. So it would automatically, it's got to be true because denying it makes a contradiction. So its denial is always false, so it's always got to be true. And the usual example would be, triangles. So if I say the three-sided figure does not have three sides, I'm engaged in a contradiction. So that the three-sided figure is three-sided, always true. Now again, it has that metaphor of containment, which is our good dead friend, he's dead, Quine, he said this is just a vague metaphor. What does that mean? Which is a fair criticism, because it's so important, you really get to say more than just contains. Also, as Hume and others have pointed out, the truth of this as being true, independent of all facts about the world, and doesn't tell us anything new. Again, go with my sci-fi, story. If you had a portal or a vessel that allowed you to travel among all the possible worlds, when you set the coordinates to some faraway possible world, you wouldn't have to wonder, are triangles three-sided in this world? Because they always are, by definition. You don't have to look out the window to see if triangles have three sides there. And they tell you nothing new. Knowing that triangles have three sides tells you nothing about the world. So those are the analytic judgments. Always true, denying there's a contradiction, but they tell you nothing about the world. And again, go with my sci-fi scenario. If you were traveling around all the possible worlds, you wouldn't have to go to check to see if triangles have three sides. They always would. Synthetic judgments give us knowledge about the world, and again, going with a weird metaphor, they somehow synthesize the subject with the predicate. And again, the reasonable criticism here is, what does that even mean? Because we know what it is to synthesize, say, chemicals, like to make synthetic coal or synthetic oil or synthetic alcohol or synthetic flavors. We know about that, but synthesizing subjects and predicates seems a weird metaphor. And of course you can deny these without getting a contradiction. And these are things that you have to check. Again, going with my sci-fi example, if you have like a dimensional portal, happen to have one in your house, and you open it up, and you set it to some kind of weird world, you know that there are triangles on the other side, but you don't know if there's a breathable atmosphere or not. That's a synthetic judgment you'd have to check, because all possible worlds supposedly would have three-sided triangles, but not all of them would have breathable atmospheres. And to deny, to say it's not breathable, would not create a contradiction, because you can't tell without checking. Which is why it's always smart to check first. So you get the synthetic, analytic. Now normally, as we've seen throughout the course of the course, a priori lines up with analytic, a posteriori lines up with synthetic. Reason being is this, of course. A priori knowledge is stuff we get without experience. You don't have to look. And all analytic judgments would be a priori. You don't look. And again, going back to my example, if you're going to be a multi-dimensional explorer and you open up your portal, you don't have to worry about triangles being three-sided, but you can't tell just by pure analytic reasoning whether there's atmosphere there or not. Which takes us to a posteriori knowledge. It's stuff you get through experience. So you'd have to check and make sure there's air before going through. Now Kant, one of the things he wanted to do again is get to that synthetic a priori. So we can kind of go through the possible combinations. The analytic a priori, that's pretty much the normal analytic. When you think of analytic, this is what we think of. And these are ones based on the principle of non-contradiction. And so these are always true. You know them without any experience. You don't have to go and check. And they're just by that analysis. Or less metaphorically, by definition. So again, if you're standing outside your dimensional portal, peering through it at some strange world, and if there are triangles there, they'll all be three-sided. And if they have bachelors, their bachelors will all be unmarried. And so you can know that without even really looking or thinking about it. What about the analytic a posteriori? Well, Kant claims there's none of that. Why not? Well, Analytic judgments are not based in experience. They're based in analysis. So there's, according to him at least, there's none of that. Now people can argue that there is some of that. It'd be a challenge, but you can argue anything. Synthetic a posteriori, these are judgments we have based in experience. And this is what we normally think of as a posteriori, before we start throwing in the analytic synthetic stuff. And this would include things like scientific judgments. Again, going back to the dimensional portal example, you're standing there outside the portal, peering through, wondering, is there air, is it breathable? You'd have to take a sample to tell. You couldn't tell just by thinking about it. You need to have some experience to make that judgment. Because you can't get it just by pure analysis, you've got to get it by experience. Hopefully not fatal experience. Before pressing on to our next exciting slide, think about this slide that needs more slide. Now Kant's dream is to get the synthetic a priori, which sounds like something they might use in like a sci-fi movie, like Unobtainium or something like that. So these are judgments that do something seemingly magical. They're a priori, so you don't actually have to go and get it through experience to test it. You know it before actually having to go and experience it directly. And they give you knowledge about the world. So this is seemingly magical. No, makes for a nice comment. So somehow you know it, prior to experience, but it tells you about the world. And this would be, as you might imagine, super useful because, again, going back to being a dimensional explorer, it'd be pretty handy if you could know like a whole bunch of stuff about what's beyond the portal before hopping through, especially things that might kill you or worse. So what are things, according to Kant, that we can know a priori, but also know about the world? Well, for him, here's an example. All events have a cause, or so he thinks, which would be useful. Second, these two are kind of odd compared to others. Kind of weirdly, Kant takes math to be synthetic a priori. Now, normally, well, I don't say normal, because that involves judgment, but our good friends like Leibniz and Descartes, they would say that math is just analytic a priori. That's to say, you just analyze all the math stuff and you get the results. It tells you nothing about the world. Kant, though, makes the argument that it's synthetic a priori, that you know it prior to experience, but it tells you something about the world. So how does he try to argue for this? Well, he gives two, if you consider geometry part of math, two examples for it. If you consider geometry not math, then two separate things. He gives the example of 7 plus 5 being 12. Now we know that's true, and we don't have to look. Going back to the dimensional explorer example, if you're standing outside your dimensional portal, peering into a strange world, you don't have to wonder, does math work normally there? If there are, if you bring 7 kilograms and 5 kilograms of weight, will that still add up to 12 in this world? I'm not considering like gravity, just the numbers. Now Kant says, yeah, you can know that before going. You don't have to worry about, like, will there be, will math stop working once I step through my portal? But he claims it tells you something about the world. And here's why. Kant claims that no matter how you analyze 7, n plus, n 5, you'll never analyze that to 12. Now one obvious problem with this is Kant really hasn't told us what the containment analyst stuff amounts to. So if someone said, no matter how much you analyze human beings, you'll never find free will or love or whatever, we can kind of make sense of that because it involved like, chemical analysis, etc. But to say no matter how much you analyze 7 plus and 5, you never get 12, a fair point is, what does that even mean? So one fair criticism is, his argument rests on this metaphor of analysis and containment, and what is that? And it's a pretty important part of his argument, because without that, it doesn't work. But that's what he claims, that somehow you know this without looking. So again, before, if you're looking through the portal, wondering on the other side, is 7 plus 5 still 12? Yeah, of course it is. That works everywhere. But he claims it tells you something about the world, because you can't do it by analysis. But again, the question is, what does that even mean? Second example, or another example, geometry. He also claims geometry is synthetic a priori. And again, people like Descartes or Leibniz would see it as just being a priori, probably analytic, that you do your, like the triangle thing. So how does he argue for this? Well, again, it's that analysis, containment thing, which is super metaphorical, mysterious problem. But the example he gives is this. We know before,
I'm sorry, you probably answered this before, but what is a synthetic a priori?
oh, the synthetic a priori is, in a way, kind of like magic, but here's the definition.
Kind of like what?
Kind of like magic,
Okay.
but not really. The synthetic part is this. Synthetic claims, top back, can hop back even more. Yeah, so synthetic judgments or synthetic claims, they tell us about the world, and in the sort of weird metaphor, they synthesize the subject with a predicate. But kind of their main, pushing aside the metaphors, kind of their basic function is this. First, they tell us stuff about the world. So, going to the example, if you were like an explorer going to a new world, these would be things where you have to like check. Things like, what is the atmosphere? What is the gravity? What kind of animals, if any, do they have there? And so these are things that tell us about the world. Also, if you deny them, you don't end up with a logical contradiction. So if you deny one of these, it doesn't create a contradiction, to illustrate. With an analytic claim, which is kind of the other part of the pairing, they're ones that are based on the principle of contradiction. To illustrate, if I take like triangle, and I say the triangle is not three-sided, what I'm saying is the three-sided figure is not three-sided, which would be a contradiction. Because I'd be saying, P and not P. Contradiction. Synthetic judgments, though, if you deny them, it doesn't generate a logical contradiction. So, for example, sci-fi scenario, you're exploring a new world, and someone says, I bet there's air. And someone else says, maybe not. If you deny that there's air on the planet, it's no contradiction, because it could be true it is air.
Oh, I got you.
Yeah, but maybe not. Yeah, so with the crudely put, the analytic, you just crudely put by definition. Like triangles have three sides, because by definition they do. With synthetic, kind of the way to look at it is you have to look, you have to check, and they tell us about the world because we don't get it by definition, we get it by, that's the way things are. So you can know that on any planet you go to, triangles have three sides because that's by definition. But whether it is air or not, or animals or plants, you'd have to check because it's not a matter of logic.
Like prior knowledge or the definite answer to it.
Yeah, it's not by definition. So by definition, triangles have three sides, but planets don't by definition have air or stuff. Yeah, so this is stuff you can know just sitting there, just doing logic and stuff, and this is where you have to go and look.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep. So this is safe. This can be super dangerous. This is like knowing that all spiders are spiders, and this is like knowing the spider is super poisonous. You only find out this by experience. Hopefully not by being bitten. Okay, anything else? No. again, Kant's sort of primary objective is to get to the synthetic a priori. Because he wants to have something that, again, is like, say, like magic, because not really, but kind of is that somehow you know a priori, prior to experience, something about the world. Which would be incredibly useful because you wouldn't have to go and check, you would already know it, and it would tell you something about the world. And it would be great if you could know really useful stuff, like, is that thing poisonous or not? Now, unfortunately, don't want to get anybody's hopes up, it doesn't really tell you things like that. Like, is the spider poisonous? Is the food, gone bad? What is the wind and watering number? It tells pretty general stuff. And again, he thinks that mathematics would be this. Geometry, he thinks, is this as well. So why would geometry be synthetic a priori rather than analytic? Because what it has to be is, we know it before experience, but it tells us something about the world. Now, one thing we know from geometry, and one of the few things I remember, is this. We know that a straight line is the shortest distance between any 2 points. Now, Kant says we don't know this through analysis, because he claims that no matter how much you analyze straight, line, short, distance, points, etc., no matter how you analyze that, you wouldn't get that result. So if you took straight line and analyzed it, whatever, again, you're probably wondering, what does that mean? And the answer is, I don't know, it's a metaphor. And again, people like Quine have said exactly the same thing. What does that even mean? So he claims, metaphorically speaking, no matter how you analyze a straight line, you would never distill out of it shortest distance. It would never like drop out. And to use a metaphor, think of like analyzing water. If you analyze, like in the metaphor, if you analyze water, you would find 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. So if you're able to analyze it non-metaphorically, you'd know it would contain hydrogen and oxygen. And that makes sense. The analysis of statements, though, metaphorical, mysterious. So it's not clear, that's because, well, it's not clear. So he thinks that, to use a metaphor, if you took the concept of straight line and took it to your philosophy lab, no matter how much you dissected it or analyzed it or whatever you do to it, you would never find within there shortest distance. It just wouldn't be in there. In contrast, something like bachelors or unmarried, if you analyze bachelor, you get unmarried as part of the definition. You don't have to look. So he claims that this gives us something about the world. Namely, suppose you wanted to get from here to Jacksonville. Well, it would tell us something about the world that the shortest distance would be a straight line. So that would be useful in a very practical sense. How should I go? Well, I want to go as straight as possible. But he claims we wouldn't have to go and look or measure it. We can know it a priori. So before we actually tried to get to Jacksonville, or even looked at a map, someone could say, what's the fastest way to get there? And someone could say a straight line and be completely right before we even look and measure, but it tells us something about the world. Namely, if you're getting around, you always want to go in a straight line if you're trying to get the shortest distance, or so he claims. So he claims it does 2 things. One, you know it by pure reason. You don't have to go and measure it or experience it. But 2, it tells us something about the world, or so he claims. So why else does he want this? Well, his end game is not to get math and geometry as synthetic a priori. His end game is to get it in physics, metaphysics, and morality, but also math. And the reason why is because of Hume. As we saw when we looked at Hume and his skepticism regarding senses, at the end Hume says, I don't know, we can't trust the senses, have beer. In the case of personal identity, which we look at, Hume says, I don't know, it's hologram, I don't know. the case of causation, I don't know. And so Kant is like, this is a mess. We can't just go around not knowing stuff. And he thinks the way he can fix it is with this. He thinks that Hume got up to the point of you know, just to the point of a solution. And if Hume had only gone a little further, he would have got it all right. So Kant is trying to show how we can know math, physics, metaphysics, and morality, and do so this way. Because he thinks that Hume has shown we can never get it a posteriori, can never get it from experience. So no matter how much we experience, we'd never be able to be certain about math, physics, metaphysics, and morality. So he thinks we need a synthetic a priori. Okay, before getting to his doing some stuff, anything about stuff so far? We need more stuff. So, Kant reads Hume and says, Hume almost got it right, almost. So he rejects Hume's empiricism. And the problem was this. The empiricists were empiricists. So they believe that all you know about the world comes from the senses. And they try to use inductive generalization, which if you had the critical inquiry class, the logic class you've seen, the basic idea is you go from your sample to the whole population. And so the empiricists would try to engage in that reasoning, sample to the whole. Now, Hume argued that, and we'll see this in great detail in the future, that because we only experience like this much out of everything, our results will always be inconclusive. For example, we think that microwaves will warm our food, but we only think this because past times we've done it, it's worked. And if you say, but how do you know it will work in the future? Now again, Hume would say if he was around today, he would microwave his popcorn. He wouldn't be like, oh, I don't know if it's going to work. But if you asked him philosophically, how do we know? He'd say, we don't. We have no idea. Maybe everything gets weird in the future. And Hume made a pretty good case for that we can never get beyond our specifics to the generalities because of the problem of induction, which we'll see more so in the future. So, we can never get what Kant wanted empirically, namely universal knowledge and necessary knowledge. In other words, we can't know that this must be true and always true about the world. Now, Hume ended up again in kind of despair and drinking alone in the bar. Well, probably not alone, he's a pretty social guy. But it made him sad enough to drink. And so Kant decides to solve the problem without beer. So how do we do this without beer? It can be done with beer too, but he tries to do it without beer. So what he invents is what is called the Transcendent Method. Not to be confused with Transcendentalism, which was a literary movement in the United States with people like Emerson, Thoreau, and other weird people from New England. New England's a weird place. I say that because I'm from New England, and it's all true. I'm still mad at Thoreau because he burned down part of my state, but still working through that. You can go to see where he burned down part of Maine. It grew back, but he burned down some stuff. Not intentionally, he just kind of accidentally burned it down. So what does he do what he does is this. So Kant says, empirically, we can never empirically see this universal necessary stuff. You know, he says Hume was right. If you go around looking for it, you're never going to see it, because it can't be seen. So what do? Well, here's how his method works. He says, you start with the nature of experience in general. And then you think, if I have this experience, what would be the necessary conditions, the requirements for me to have this experience? In other words, what things would have to be for me to, say, experience temporal experiences or spatial experiences? And he claims that if we gotta have space to have spatial experiences, and we have spatial experiences, we've got to have space. If we got to have time to have temporal experiences, we got to have time, which is kind of clever. So here's how he does it, what he calls the transcendental structures of experience. First off, there are formal features that are not limited to any particular experience. So they're a general thing. So it wouldn't be, well, take a concrete example. Like the experience of a backpack has all kinds of particular features that wouldn't be in all experiences. So even all backpack experiences. So my backpack is a certain color, shape, size, level of damage. I need to replace it this year. But I have the view of, I can only replace backpacks at the end of the semester. It's like a rule that goes, I don't know why I forget it. But sometimes they get pretty rough working. It's pretty sad backpack, covered in duct tape. So different backpack experience will be quite different. So it's not like the particular parts of that experience. Because again, if you look at other backpacks, you get different stuff. But what it would be all the features that would be in all experiences of that very general type. And all the features that have to be there. So what he's trying to do is get from not just like, what are particular things that are, say, unique or particular to looking at that backpack, but all sort of broad experiences, like all experiences of objects in space and time. What features do they always have to have? And he thinks that if you find in an experience, a general type of experience, it always has, bless you, these features, those have to be the necessary universal features, because you can't have the experience without it, hence logically necessary, and the universal because they're in all the experiences. Now, Kant doesn't think that you have to go and check every one. That's where empiricism blows up, because if you have to go from, I look at the backpack and I have this list of stuff, and I look at something else, a list of stuff, and you run into the problem reduction. Namely, if you go by empirically having to look, the next thing you look at, it might not have that. So you could be wrong. So if you go with empiricism, it could, the next one could always prove you wrong. So you can never know. So what Kant does is this. Here's his fix. Instead of having to check everyone individually, you check them kind of in a general way. And here's the test. Try to imagine an experience without a certain structural feature. And if you can't, then you have a reason to accept that it's necessary for that experience, that you couldn't have the experience without that feature. And it's not a matter of going and checking each one, because again, if you have to check it empirically, the next one it could go, you're like, oops, I was wrong. It doesn't have to have that. So, I mean, to use a crappy analogy, if someone thought that all backpacks had to be black and gray, they thought, well, that's definitely true, and they look over and it's like, oh, look, purple backpack. I'm so wrong. But if you find something that has to be in every backpack experience, you would find the universal and necessary backpack. So what would be these features? Well, he claims these include space, time, causation, substance, and others. Because again, his test is, don't look, try to imagine, could I have an experience of this type and not have that feature? Would that be possible? If the answer is no, then it's got to be a necessary feature. It's always got to be there or you can't have an experience, and it's got to be universal because it's got to be in all experiences of that type. So what would these be? Well, I've said some. Namely, space and time. Now, this is part of his reversal. Normally, before we get infected with looking at Kant, and I apologize for that, we normally think of space in Newtonian sense, which is the common sense view. Space is a place where we keep our stuff, also ourselves, keep ourselves here too. And so we experience, space, we think we experience space, it's, this, this stuff. Now Kant says, he flips this around. So we're not experiencing space and time, it's that we have the space-time filter that we shape our experiences with. So space and time is not up there, space and time is in here, and we shape, filter, adjust our experiences with a space-time filter. It sounds like a good name for an indie band, space-time filter. And he calls these the forms of intuition. So how would this work? Well, let's take the example of spades. Now, we can imagine space without objects. We just think empty space. Space is a really big place. But he thinks, incorrectly, because there are people who can do this, we can't imagine objects without space. In a way, it's kind of wrong, because Leibniz understood that. But that's what he thinks. Like in our normal view, before we get corrupted by philosophy, we can imagine like an empty area, picturing space, without stuff in it. But we can't imagine objects without a space for them to be in, or so he claims. Now, he claims space is not something we experience, which is something you get from Hume. Hume noted, we don't actually experience space. So what Hume said is, so we can't know this stuff. It's not an experience, we can't know. And again, Kant is kind of flipping this around. He says, you're right. If we had to experience space to know it, we can't do that because we never experience space. What we do, though, is we experience objects that are spatially structured. Why? Because our mind, again, to use the histogram metaphor, we have the space filter. And so when stuff comes in, whatever it is, we space filter it. We do a thing and we perceive the world spatially. So space is in here. So we have the space filter, so whatever's out there somehow goes through our senses, into our mind, and we get the raw data, whatever that is. We have no idea what that is. And what we do is we apply the space filter to it, and we organize things spatially. So all the stuff floods in, and we organize, without even thinking about it, we organize all the desks and the objects and stuff, and our mind organizes everything spatially.
So do you ever hear like someone say that they have, well, a lot of my family and friends tell me I have that spatial sense.
Mm-hmm.
So how do, if our brains are supposed to automatically do that, what is that, like technically that doesn't mean that I have a bad spatial sense, don't we technically all have the same?
We would.
The same one?
Mm-hmm. But it's a good point because if someone has bad spatial sense, so people have varying degrees of spatial judgment, in a way it kind of helps Kant because if space was just like there, we would all kind of work the same way. But it's sort of like the filter, we have the same basic filter. So we think, we all see the world the same way, but people have better or worse, like, judgments of distance and so on. So their filter works, say, better or worse in terms of organizing stuff. Yeah, so one way to think of it is, maybe your filter isn't getting things quite as they should be, so you're misjudging, space. But he would say that we all, he claims, though it would be hard to confirm, that we all basically have the same result. So we all think of, there's these rows, the desks, the screen is here, the room is laid out this way. So we organize the experience in basically the same way. So we claim. Yeah, so whatever it is that comes in, and you can kind of picture like, I always picture kind of like the computer design where they put in like the objects and then organize them and then, color them and render them and so forth. But we do that instantly. So we're like rendering the room in real time because we have really good processors. But what we're experiencing, he claims, is that whatever's coming in, no idea. But because we're all human, we have a space filter, space filter H1, whatever, and that's what we get. We all process it basically the same way, with some variations, And as we saw, when I mentioned the case, people who are born blind, who get sight, they have to learn how to organize their experiences, but eventually they get to where, you know, people who are sighted from birth are, so that you figure out how to work those filters. Now, time for him also works the same way. Now, time's kind of interesting, of course, because of time travel. One kind of sci-fi view of time, or popular view of time, is that time is, well, kind of like a thing. So we tend to think of time as like a room, or like a house. And we're always in the present, but the past is there, the future is there, and there's actually a past like behind us. You know, because time travel stories, you know, sci-fi, do require the past is still there, because in, you know, standard time travel, like in the story, you know, The Time Machine or Doctor Who, Star Trek, etc., you go back to the past, and it's still somehow there. Or you go ahead to the future, and the future is there to visit. So on that view, time is a thing, you know, like, that you can go to and travel around it. Now, Kant rejects that. For him, time is not a thing in the world. It's not out there. What is it then? Well, time is in our minds. We have a temporal filter. So what we do is this. Because of the way we are, you know, if you believe in God, the way God created us, the revolution, you know, evolved us, our thoughts occur in temporal sequence. We are temporal creatures. We have a concept of the past, present, and future. And what we do is whatever comes in, we organize it, past, present, future. You know, what we remember is the past, what's happening now, present, and what we are thinking about that's going to happen, the future. But he claims there's really no time out there. Time is illusion, lunchtime doubly so. Now, this allows for some interesting possibilities. Now, given Kant's view, it's in a way very sci-fi. You could have beings in the same universe that experience the universe very differently. Space and what we call space and call time. It's not that time is a thing that's different for us or them, because it's not a thing out there, it's a thing in here. Now, this allows an interesting solution to many theological problems. Also to some interesting, like, supposedly psychic phenomena. And here's how it can work. Now, one problem that comes up in religion that has God is this. God, of course, supposedly knows everything. He knows all of the things. And since most religions, like for example the Bible includes prophecy, supposedly, depending on your interpretation of prophecy, if you believe in it, that things like the revelation of St. John would be prophecy. That's going to happen for real. So in the future, he's seeing the future. Similarly, when you have, in order to have prophets who predict the future must be known. Otherwise, they're just guessing, and that's not prophecy. That's gambling. So how can God know everything, and how can we have things like prophecy, or if you want to get into the psychic phenomena, things like precognition, where you know what's going to happen before it happens. Now, one possibility is determinism, because if the universe is deterministic, predetermined, you can know what's going to happen before it happens because, well, it's like having a book. You can, if you know the script, you know what's going to happen. It's like if you imagine the script to a play, and then the actors are up on the stage doing it, and if you know they're going to follow the script, you know what's going to happen. So, for example, when you see Romeo and Juliet, spoiler, they both die. Sorry. you know they're going to die because you know how it ends. The play is determined. I'm sure someone at one point is, that'd be kind of a funny thing where they throw away, this is stupid, throw away the poison, the knife, and live happily ever after. And that'd be the last time they're allowed to do that. Another way is, of course, if you don't want to have determinism, suppose you want to have free will. How can you have God know what we're going to do and have prophecy, but have us all be free? Well, here's the fix. God's conception of time is not ours. We're perceptually limited. We are, to use an analogy, it's like when you have a digital file, like on a DVD or Blu-ray or just like a YouTube video. Normally when you push play, we have to watch it, and yeah, you can fast forward and stuff, but normally we live life kind of like a record player playing a song, or like having to play a video without it. I mean, all you have is a play function. And so we go along the video, and it plays, 1 to 1, 1 minute of video, 1 minute of life. That's how we experience time. So we get that little slice moving along. Now God, his view of time is different. Imagine if you could take any YouTube video, and imagine you could see every frame, kind of like a storyboard. Have you ever seen storyboarding for movies or plays? They put out all the stuff. Or like a page from like a graphic novel, where you can see the whole page. So imagine you can see everything. Like, so for us, it's like watching a video being played normal time. For God, it would be like looking at, a graphic novel with every page, you can see it once, on the wall. So for him, the past just means like here, and the future just means over here, but effectively it's all the same to him. He can see the past, present, and future equally. So he knows what you're going to do, not because he makes you do it, but because you do it. And from his standpoint, you already did the thing you're going to do. Which sounds like a country song. You did what you're going to do, and you did it. Put in something about cows and dogs and horses and pickup trucks, hit song. Emmy, please, or Grammy, please. I'd like to thank all the people who made this possible. Physically, Kant and his view of time. Yeah, so God for him, time works like that. And so you can imagine, kind of sci-fi-ish, there could be beings that aren't quite God, but different from us, that have different perceptions of time. And so maybe we have like kind of the record player view. We're a needle on one note. And maybe there are beings that can and sci-fi includes stuff like this, because things that can kind of see ahead a little bit in the future, and so they have like an advantage to us, because they can see the future. It'd be normal to them, but we can't see it. Now you can also work in things like precognition. One thing, in religion they call it, of course, prophecy, where you see the future, or at least part of it, like there's going to be a great evil, or a plague, or in the case of fantasy movies, there's going to be the chosen one who will save everybody from the evil. Or you could have, psychic precogs, like in also science fiction, where they can see ahead, what's going to happen to the future in varying degrees. Now, Kant's right. Precognition would not be, kind of odd, but would be completely possible, because if time is simply in our mind, so to speak, if a creature had a different, cognitive filters, temporal filters, they might see ahead in the future. And it may be kind of like, like precognition in the stories and comics is usually not perfect. It's kind of like bits and pieces. So you could explain precognition in Kantian terms. They have a different temporal filter. So whereas we're like a needle, on a record, or we can just hit play and experience like this, they get to like fast forward a little bit, get peek ahead a little bit, or peek way ahead. And this would be weirdly perfectly consistent with Kant's view. So if you like weird phenomena, or like if you're interested in like religious prophecy, how would that work? This could be an interesting paper topic. Like how could you explain prophecies being legitimate and not just like someone tripping out on on drugs or something. And Kant's theory would allow for you to argue that how that would be possible, because if time is not a thing out in the world, but how we experience it, you could have a being that experiences time very differently from us. Or maybe there's occasional, you know, they get like a look, you know, ahead. So prophecy would be, you know, boom, God shows you this, and so you get a vision of the future, and then that's it. You write it down, trying to describe it based on what you know now. Or if you like psychic phenomena like precognition, similar deal. Maybe people who are precognizant, they've got like a bonus filter. They paid that extra, you know, fee and got that, you know, peek ahead, you know, a couple minutes or a couple years or something. And so Kant's theory would allow for such a thing. So time is not real, but how we experience reality. And so there could be, again, kind of the interesting thing is there could be beings radically different from us living in the same universe who experience their concepts could be totally different from us. So interacting with them could be really hard because they may see time and space totally differently than we do. Our good dead friend H.P. Lovecraft, he's a guy that came up with like Cthulhu, and if you see you know, horror about things from other worlds, he's kind of the guy that really got that will influence people like King and others. And he had the notion of beings that transcended, you know, space and time, and the idea that if you could see the world, you know, see beyond our concepts, you'd go mad. This fellow, Arthur Machen, he wrote a story called The Great God Pan. And the idea was that if you could somehow see beyond the veil of our concepts and see the real world, it would just destroy you mentally, you'd go insane. And he was probably influenced by Kant. And it does make for some interesting horror, that the world, you know, can be truly terrifying. And if you had different, you know, conceptual filters or they were damaged, you would seem insane. Although being insane means you are the only one with that, but if everybody had that, that would be sanity. And the same people would now be mad. Math. Everybody's thinking. Now, he also wants to claim that math is synthetic, tells us about the world, and a priori. And again, our previous thinkers like Leibniz and Descartes, they believed that math was a priori, but they would probably classify it as analytic. But Kant claims that it tells us about the world. How? Well, that's why he did space and time. Because, and this can be seen as like cheating, but this is what he argues. Geometry, of course, is space. It's space math, essentially. You know, if you recall classes in geometry, it is about multi-dimensional space. Most commonly, two-dimensional and three-dimensional space. But of course, you can throw on lots more dimensions just by drawing more lines. Crazy space. Badly drawn. And so, geometry is right. Geometry is a science or math of spades. And interestingly, there can be multiple geometries. We normally think of, you know, geometry as geometry, but there are Euclidean, non-Euclidean geometries. They're all in a way internally consistent, but all in a way incompatible with each other. And so one interesting question is, what is the geometry of our space-time? Because you can have multiple geometries. And there may be realms that have different dimensions, maybe different geometries that coexist with our own.
That's the worst math.
Yeah.
Geometry.
Yes, math is terrifying. So that's why geometry would be, according to him, would be the synthetic a priori, because it's all about spades, or so he claims. Now, what about math? And this one seems the most like cheatery, because he says, well, math is a method of processing numbers, and so you got to have time, because you got to process at the time, and so it's got to be synthetic a priori. And on one hand, you could say, why isn't that clever? The other hand, you might say, that's kind of cheating, because wouldn't that make like everything synthetic a priori that you use like, time for? But that's what he claimed. Now again, the reason why he wants this all to be synthetic a priori, because again, humans up in that, I don't know, you know, it's all about being a skeptic. So if you can do the synthetic a priori, you don't give the skeptic any room to get their little claws in there. Because the skeptic always wants to say, how do you know? And if you say, from experience, well, you have that gap. How do you know that what's in here matches what's out there? You know, skeptic. But the way Kant tries to do it is say, well, there's no gap, because the experience comes in, gets filtered, and there's no gap between experience, the object, and the concept. There's nothing for the skeptic to get their claws into, or so he claims. But of course they still can, because they always can. They're terrible. So then, if the whole goal is to get this knowledge, so we can beat the skeptic, how does this work? Well, he claims knowledge comes from sensibility and understanding. Now, it doesn't mean sensibility like sense and sensibility like Jane Austen. What he means is the senses. So literally, the ability to sense. And what he claims is this, probably correctly. If we only had perceptual mechanisms, one way to think of this in pragmatic term, if we were like simple organisms like amoebas or protozoa with no concepts, we just got, you know, sensory experience, we would have sensations but no knowledge. So he's probably right. Amoebas probably don't know stuff. I don't want to tell them amoeba stuff, so that's why I say probably, maybe they do. So what we need is not just sensations, we need principles of organization. We need these concepts. So we need understanding. So, I mean, in a way you can say this kind of makes sense, because we don't think, again, that amoeba, bacteria, and stuff, that we think they interact with their environment. You know, they react to stimuli, they seek, you know, food, and they avoid death stuff. But we don't think they have, like, understanding. We don't think they have, like, cognition going on. And then we think more complicated animals, that they have, you know, stuff going on in them, that they have organizational concepts. And people have often said the dogs have a conception of time. And I think they definitely do. They definitely understand food time. So we have, according to Kant, both. We've got sensations, and then we take those sensations and process them. So knowledge is both of those working together. So sensibility, or the senses, give us objects. So going back to the bad drawings, so something out there hits our senses, and then we get an object of understanding. So without sensibility, we'd have nothing. And one way to think of this is like, think of the Helen Keller syndrome. You know, if you have no vision and hearing, then you're not going to have anything. Without any senses, it'd be presumably nothing. Now, of course, we don't know for sure, because we have no way of communicating with people who have no means of communication. But we do know from, like the Helen Keller scenario, that no visual senses, no auditory senses, you're not going to have that stuff. So he's right. If you have no zero senses, you're getting nothing. Or to use an example of a smartphone, if you just take a blank hard drive or a blank phone and never connected anything, and have nothing on, you know, cover up the microphones and cameras, and nothing's getting in there. And of course, without understanding, we'd have no capacity to think. So without senses, nothing to process. Without understanding, no processing of the objects. So thoughts without content would be empty. You'd be thinking about nothing. And intuitions without concepts would be blind. So we end up with this like parent. So it's kind of like, well, to use a crappy metaphor, it's kind of like, you know, a scenario of one person who can't see, and one person who can't walk, so you know, put the person who can see on your shoulders, and they can guide you, you know, the person who can see on your shoulders, so they can guide you around. So that way you're able to function. And Kant's kind of envisioned that kind of team up. that the understanding by itself, you know, would be useless with nothing to understand, and the senses without understanding, well, they wouldn't be useless because you'd be like a amoeba, but they wouldn't have anything to, you wouldn't have any capacity for thought. And so you combine them, like chocolate and peanut butter, two great tastes that go great together. So we have the experience coming into the senses, gives us the dough, and then our judgments and our concepts bake that into the bread of knowledge, to use metaphor. Or so we close. And then you dot, not from bread.
If that was true, or if that's true, that sensibility and understanding is the only way that you can have knowledge, how did Helen Keller learn anything? Because she didn't have any senses.
Oh, but she did have touch.
Oh.
So that was her avenue in. Yeah, so she did, if you didn't have anything, then we'd never, yeah, it's a good point, because we'd never be able to know. Because if someone had zero, imagine someone's born was, they have no, you know, their brain is totally disconnected from everything. We have no way of knowing what they would be experiencing, because we have no way of contacting them. I mean, that would be a terrifying thing to happen, but I guess the only way we could find out would be later if they were somehow able to connect to the person, like, you know, maybe like do surgery or something, and then see what they could find out from them. But I don't think there are any cases of someone having zero input and then getting it so we can communicate with them. So yeah, we really have no idea. Kant would say, in that scenario, it'd be like having your memory on your phone and having like Instagram, but no photos ever. So you have nothing for the filter. The filters would be there, but they have nothing to work with. And so there'd be nothing, if there was no sensation, not even internal sensation, there'd be nothing to think about. So they'd be kind of, it'd be like driving your car in neutral. You know, it's going nowhere. But that is an interesting problem. You know, what if you had no sensory input? What would go on at all? What would go on? Yeah, Terry would be like hell, basically. But then again, you wouldn't even know you were in hell. So yeah, that'd be terrible. Sensory deprivation. We know what happens when people go into sensory deprivation chambers for a while, even if they're like normal people. They eventually go like solitary confinement, makes you crazy. So yeah, probably the worst, one of the worst things imaginable. Worse than pain, because you wouldn't even have anything to work with. Yeah, maybe that's what hell is. You're just like cut off forever. Yeah, forever and ever and ever. You know, beyond, it's something even beyond suffering. Oh, how about I give the devil an idea? So you probably don't know that. Or we sitting there like, ooh, good idea, thanks. So we end up just basically processing nothing. And if we had just the sensory input, again, we'd basically be in the amoeba. We just have stuff coming in, and probably just automatic responses, you know, avoid and seek. But I guess it is also kind of an interesting question, do amoebas have cognition? Because they do, they're alive, they do move, they do respond to stuff. There's actually been some interesting science fiction written about amoebas and stuff that do think, like from their perspective. It's kind of interesting. Some pretty good writers have actually done that. There's one, James Blish, he wrote a story called Surface Tension, and some of the characters are single-cell organisms that they think and talk. Of course, they have to make an interesting story, but they think and talk, and it's from their perspective. So what are these filters we have built in? And again, going with the metaphor of Instagram, it's like we have these built-in filters, and unlike Instagram, they just automatically get, you know, applied. It'd be kind of like an Instagram auto-filtering things for you, you know, appropriately. So we'd always, you know, do the things so you always get the right result. And you wouldn't even notice that it's happening because it'd always, you know, do it automatically. So in our, you know, mind, Instagram, we have these concepts. And he calls them pure concepts. Or another name for them is the categories of understanding. They're pure because they're a priori. So that's what he means by not pure in the sense that they're not, you know, dirty or anything, a priori. Now Kant made a major assumption that is of course totally wrong. which is that Aristotle's logic was the final word in logic. But of course not true, because categorical logic is not the final word, because we ended up with truth functional logic and other types of logic. So, oops. Now, it doesn't mean this necessarily doesn't mean he's wrong, because this could still be, correct, but he's wrong about Aristotle's logic being the final word. And he claims we have 12 types of judgment. So, in our filter collection, if you're able to think of your mind like an app, you got 12 filters in there. And he claims, you may think, 12? That's not many. And he thinks that's all you need is 12. Because any object that's possible will be handled by those 12. This is the way, according to him, how we, again, bake that bread. So if you go on the metaphor, it's like a lump of dough comes in. Oh, we don't get the dough. It's sort of like when you're going to Panera Bread. They don't bring you like a lump of dough. They bring you the cooked bread. And so kind of that's the way the mind works. The lump of dough comes in through the senses, and then it's baked and then put on your mental table. You get the bread. And you kind of try to guesstimate, what was it like before the baking. Now, in the case of bread, we can see, uncooked bread. In the case of experience, though, we never get to peek in the kitchen. We don't know what's coming in. We don't know what it was before it was cooked. It's kind of like people who eat, pork chops or lamb chops, and they don't know what it's coming from. You don't know it's from an animal until you have that revelation. And it's kind of this way. You're getting the food, but you don't know what animals it's coming from. And in this case, you can never know, which may be good. So what are these 12? Well, since they break it nicely, I can use this high-quality infographic. No expense spared. So they consist of quantity, which includes unity, plurality, totality, which is correct because you have one, many, all. And you can see if you've had the critical thinking class or had Aristotle's logic, again, he had 4 sentence types. Some S or P, some S or not P, all S or P, all S or no S or P. So one, many, all. There's also quality, reality, negation, limitation, and then lastly, modality, possibility, impossibility, existence, non-existence, necessity, contingency. Now, counting these, you might say, wait, that's less than 12. But here's why. These also count.
Okay.
Yeah, so so it's kind of like 9, 3, 3, 3, and then these extra. So those are the 12 categories. And Kant thinks, we're closing this today, you can take anything in your experience and it will fit in these. So for example, backpack. One backpack, it's real, it's limited, there are things that it's not, it is possible because it's actual, it exists, and it's contingent because it doesn't have to exist. So the backpack. Now again, he doesn't think this covers like every possible thing, like color, obviously like all the colors are listed in there, but that would be under qualities. And he thinks that these broad categories cover everything. These are the 12 filters in the mind that process everything. So, done for today. So have a good rest of the day. Enjoy those 12 categories. And I'll see you on Thursday.